Jessica Tarlov, the only sane voice on the Fox propaganda network, put everyone on blast in the most recent episode of The Five. Not just her bad faith right-wing co-hosts, but also the bad faith coming from the mainstream media. And it was as exquisite as it was accurate. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. All right, folks, again, the disclaimer, I'm feeling a bit under the weather, so if I sound strange or if I tip over in my chair, just bear with me. We'll get through it. We have a few clips to play. Obviously, we're going to lead with Jessica Tarlov because she is one of our favorites to cover here. She is, again, like the lone bulwark of sanity and credibility that the Fox propaganda network has left at all. She is a frequent guest host or co-host on The Five, which, as we've talked about before, might as well be called 4v1 because she is up against some of the most bad faith right-wing actors at Fox News, and that's saying something. So what makes this clip interesting, though, is she doesn't just call out her bad faith right-wing co-hosts who deserve it. She also calls out the bad faith coming from the mainstream media when it comes to reporting on President Biden, the Democratic Party, and the progressive left in general. Let's play the clip, and we'll unpack it.
So Joe Biden, his standing on the world stage in terms of what world leaders think of him, up what people in other countries think is up. And I think it's dereliction of duty, this narrative that's going on in the media and certainly in the liberal media, where they just want to crap on him. Because if you look at like the morning consult poll, the first poll taken since the ceasefire began came out, first major poll, Biden's up 4 points and is now up 1 over Trump. There was a YouGov poll out last week that had Biden up over Trump. The New York Times Santa poll, which we gave its due, and we talked about the fact that Biden was down and he was losing the swing states in the crosstabs. And the New York Times didn't even cover this part of it. The crosstabs revealed that if Trump is convicted of anything, and he has 91 counts that he's facing, he loses by 10 points, and he loses every single swing state.
What's that got to do with what would you do to negotiate to get the hostages
I answered,
no,
okay,
but we're not talking about Donald Trump.
2 points in the real
in the average. I didn't, but my point is that it is more fun.
That's not the topic.
You always say that's not the topic.
Because you go off topic.
Let's not talk about who goes off topic here.
The crosstabs.
Really?
But it is relevant because you start out by saying this guy is a moron and we're in a hot war here and a cold war here and the border's open and whatever. So I'm talking about what's going on in the ground.
No,
I'm talking about the general.
Jessica, we have not had a zombie apocalypse. Let's just remember that.
So as we've talked about before, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, when her Fox News right-wing co-hosts are uncomfortable with the truths that she's spitting, the facts that she's laying out, they derail, they interrupt, they heckle. And there are 4 of them versus her 1. So she has a daunting task ahead of her. Any debater, I don't care how good you are, I consider myself a pretty good debater. And if I were up against 4 morons in a setting like that, in enemy terrain, I would struggle. Everybody does it. So she does a Herculean job. Now, before I play the next clip, I just want to point out what she's talking about. So we've talked about Biden's bad polling because I don't think it is wise to ignore it. I also think it's just a snapshot in time. We're a year away from it. Things can change. So I'm not like saying that this is the end of the world. But she's pointing out that, yes, it's responsible to cover the bad polling. But what about when the polling is good for President Biden and the Democrats? Well, nobody talks about it. And so she mentioned the Morning Consult and the YouGov poll. And the most recent iterations of the Morning Consult and YouGov poll have Biden beating Trump, but nobody's talking about it. So what Jessica Tarlov is saying is there's a complete asymmetry here. All we cover are the bad stuff coming from Biden and the Democrats, including, as she said, the so-called liberal media. And we also played this clip recently from an interview with All In with Chris Hayes. And the guest here, and I think it's Chris Roberts or Robert, well, something like that. I'm sorry, just blanked on his name. He also made the case that basically everybody in mainstream, social, and alternate media has an invested incentive to undermine the gains and progress made by the Democratic Party. So I want to just give you a bit of a refresher, and we'll go from there.
David, I thought your thread the other day was fascinating about the rhetorical incentives that a whole variety of factions, ostensibly on the center left or in the establishment of American life, have towards their views of the current incumbent American president and what to say about him. Run me through your argument.
Yeah, this has been striking me for years, and it's only gotten more acute lately, I think. Obviously, anytime you watch right-wing media, Republican media, it's wall-to-wall criticism of Democrats, even more so than praise of Republicans. Demonizing Democrats has been the core of Fox's reason for being since it was born. And then you have the left, the sort of far left, the progressives, who, for good reasons, I think, want to move the Dems left and want the Dems to be more ambitious, and so are constantly criticizing Dems from the left to the point that it's become kind of a rigid habit that they do, regardless, no matter what happens. And then you have these sort of, these sort of thoughtful centrist Dem pundits, all of whom need to show the other thoughtful centrist Dem pundits how independent they are, the fact they're not partisans, they're not team players, they're thinking for themselves. And the way to do that is by criticizing their own party. And so if you go down the list, you'll notice there's no one left who actually just wants to go tell voters what Democrats have accomplished, what Dems are doing, who wants to actually be partisan for Democrats.
And as we head into an election year, as we've discussed, this is huge, folks. We have to do this. Now, David Roberts there is a clean energy activist, okay? So he is relatively progressive, right? I mean, he's very much a green energy guru. And so as he says, and as I've said, it's okay. It's actually not only okay, it's not only permissible, it's good. It's good for the left, it's good for Democrats, it's good for the country. For the progressive left to push, to needle, to constantly provoke, to try to get the Democratic Party to make even more progressive policy. But, and this is critical, it is also incumbent on every progressive, you and I and everybody who is not a conservative, from the center left all the way to the far left, we also have to acknowledge the meaningful gains of the Democratic Party. It's not mutually exclusive, right? We can't just criticize, and we can't just praise. We can't just accept what we've been given, but we also can't ignore what we've been given. We have to be fair. We have to be honest, because if we're not, it will depress voter turnout as we head into this election year. If people don't feel that their vote matters and that their vote for Biden and Democrats in subsequent election cycles mattered at all and that we got nothing for it, then they're less likely to come out and vote. So it has to be a parallel message of, yes, there are meaningful, important gains that we would not have gotten if Republicans had been elected, but also there's still a hell of a lot of work to be done. It is necessary, and we will continue to push, prod, and provoke to get Biden and the Democrats to move even further left. Now, the asymmetry that Jessica Tarlov and David Roberts are talking about also manifests in another way, which is, and this is an article on Substack written by Robert Reich, who used to be the Secretary of Labor for President Clinton. And he was relatively progressive then. He is still a voice of progressive economics to this day. He's a great resource for that. And he has a Substack article talking about the 4 ways the mainstream media is quietly helping Trump and his Republican allies. We won't read the whole thing. I'll just give you the cliff notes. He says, first, it's drawing a false equivalence between Trump and Biden, claiming that Biden's political handicap is his age, while Trump's corresponding handicap is his criminal indictments, when in fact, at least by the standard we evaluate age with respect to Biden, Trump also qualifies. As the guys on Pod Save America said, Biden's old. Trump is old and crazy and criminal. Trump is objectively worse on all metrics. Secondly, Robert Reich says, every time the mainstream media reports on another move by Trump and his Republican allies towards neo-fascism, it tries to balance its coverage by pointing out some fault in the Democratic Party, such as the ongoing federal corruption and bribery case against Senator Bob Menendez. And the net effect for readers is to assume all politics is rotten. Now, what's important is the vast majority of elected Democrats came out relatively quickly to condemn Bob Menendez and either demand his resignation or investigation. You contrast that with how the Republican Party has run cover for Trump or even George Santos, and again, there's a complete asymmetry. The fact of the matter is, when it comes to elected politicians, the Democratic Party is vastly, objectively, morally superior to elected Republican politicians. Robert Reich goes on to say, which brings to the third way the mainstream media is quietly helping Trump. It makes it seem as if the dysfunction in Washington is coming from both parties. And we saw this during the tension pertaining to the government shutdown, which is you had the CNN, the New York Times say, gridlock in Congress or congressional dysfunction. Well, it wasn't. It was dysfunction coming from a single source, which was the House Republican Conference. Democrats were there. Democrats were ready to work. But as David Roberts just pointed out in that clip with All In with Chris Hayes, it's like the mainstream media feels compelled to grade Republicans on a curve so as to not appear partisan. And then the last thing that Robert Reich says is blaming both sides for this chaos plays into Trump's and his allies' goal of wanting Americans to believe the nation has become ungovernable, so it needs a strong man. He's 100% correct. This media and eco landscape, this media and political ecosystem, again, sorry, the cough syrup is messing with me. All it does is play into the Republican advantage. And then the very last thing I'll point out, Media Matters just conducted a recent survey or recent research and survey and poll. And they went back and they compared the coverage of Donald Trump's recent fascistic remarks in which he refers to his political enemies as vermin, which is rhetoric coming from Mussolini and Hitler, to how they covered Secretary Hillary Clinton's basket of deplorables remark all the way back in 2016. And what they found was a complete asymmetry there, too. The big three broadcast TV networks provided 18 times more coverage of Clinton's 2016 deplorables comment than Trump's vermin remark on their combined nationally syndicated morning news. CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC mentioned Clinton's deplorables comment nearly 9 times more than Trump's vermin comment. Folks, this is untenable. This is absolutely untenable. False equivalences and are just where integrity and honesty go to die. Sometimes in life, be it in politics or everything else, there are meaningful differences between two or more things. I'm currently suffering from either a wicked cold or a low-grade flu or something like that. It's not stage 4 cancer. There's an asymmetry there. We wouldn't say that these two things are equal. We wouldn't say that jaywalking is the same as axe murder. We wouldn't go, well, they're both criminals, a jaywalker and a mass murderer. So it's the same logic. We have to apply it to politics. Donald Trump is and has always been objectively far worse than Hillary Clinton. So there's no need to pretend that the two are on some sort of equal moral playing field. And that doesn't mean that you have to approve of Hillary Clinton's morals or her policies. And it doesn't mean that you can't criticize her. It just means that you shouldn't artificially, boost your criticisms of her in order to balance out with Trump when no such natural balance exists. So anyway, all of which is to say, you and I, every single one of us in our own way, have to constantly, aggressively push back on this every time we see it. We have to try in our own way to correct this asymmetry and grade everybody on one standard. That's what's going to help us in the 2024 election. And if we do that, Republicans will lose. Let me know what you think in the comments.